Welcome to the deep dive. You give us the sources, we help you get right to the core of it. Today, we're tackling, well, a really beautiful mystery, actually. It's been around for ages in the music world. Can a top pianist actually change the timbre of a single note just by how they touch the key? Or is that just, something poetic they tell students?
It's a fascinating puzzle, honestly. For like 100 years, it's been this battle. On one side, you have the intuition of master musicians. They know they can play a bright note or a
Yeah.
dark note. And on the other, you had science, which, well, struggle to measure it. But this deep dive, we're going to show you the proof. The musicians, they were right all along.
Okay, so there's actual scientific proof now.
Yes, exactly. Thanks to some incredible new sensor tech, we can literally map the tiny, tiny fingertip movements that create that expressive sound.
And the source for this is brand new research, right? Just out.
That's right. Published September 22nd, 2025, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. PNAS. It's a big deal. Comes from a team led by Dr. Shinichi Furuya, working out of the Neuropiano Institute and Sony Computer Science Labs. They didn't just, listen subjectively. They measured the physics behind it, the actual mechanics.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like this could really change things.
Oh, it's definitely a paradigm shift.
Hmm.
But before we jump into what they found, we should probably understand just how big this debate was for, a century.
Yeah, let's get into that history a bit. You mentioned it's been around forever. The source material even says Nature magazine was writing about this way back, early 20th century.
Exactly. It's not a new question. The core argument against the pianist controlling timbre was, well, pretty simple physics, or so people thought.
Oh, what was the argument, basically?
It boiled down to the piano's mechanism, specifically something called the double escapement. So when you press a key, right, it pushes the little mechanism towards the string. But there's a point, the escapement, where the key basically lets go of the hammer. After that point, the hammer flies freely to hit the string.
Ah, okay. So the idea was once the hammer is flying, the player can't influence it anymore.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
The only thing the player controlled before that point was how hard they pressed, which determined the hammer's final speed.
And speed just equals volume, right? Louder or softer.
That was thinking. Hammer velocity dictates amplitude, which we hear as volume. End of story. So any perception of a warmer tone or maybe a sharper one must have just been listeners reacting subconsciously, maybe to tiny changes in loudness or maybe tempo fluctuations between notes.
Not a fundamentally different sound quality from the same note at the same volume.
Exactly. That idea that you could change the character of the sound itself, that was dismissed as, well, unquantifiable. It was called tacit knowledge. Something experts knew but couldn't really explain or measure.
And that must have made teaching really hard. How do you teach something you can't actually define?
It was incredibly difficult. Teachers felt it. They knew the difference between just playing the notes and playing expressively, but articulating how to achieve that dark or bright sound was almost impossible beyond metaphors.
So it wasn't that the pianists were wrong, it was that science just couldn't measure it yet.
That's the crux of it. We lacked the tools and the experimental design to really isolate timbre from volume and tempo in a robust way until this new study.
Okay, so let's talk about how Dr. Frew's team cracked it. You mentioned new tech. That sounds like the key.
It absolutely was the key. The instrumentation made all the difference. See, previous attempts often failed because if you attached a sensor to the key...
It changes the key itself, right? Adds weight, changes how it moves.
Exactly. You'd be measuring something different from how a normal piano key behaves. The measurement itself interfered with the phenomenon.
A classic physics problem. So they needed a way to measure without touching, like a ghost sensor.
Yeah, basically. They developed this proprietary system. It's called the Hackey non-contact sensor system.
Hacky, okay.
Yeah.
How does it work?
It uses laser light reflection. So tiny lasers bounce light off the underside of the key, tracking its position and movement extremely precisely, but without any physical contact.
Clever. And the precision level, you said it was high.
Unbelievably high. It measures the key's movement 1,000 times per second. That's a time resolution of 1 millisecond.
1 millisecond.
Wow. And spatially, it can detect changes as small as 0.01 millimeters.
0.01 millimeters. Okay, I need context. How small is that?
Think about a single human hair. It's about 1/10 the width of that.
Okay, that's incredibly precise. Why did they need that much detail? Couldn't they just get an average speed?
No, because the crucial movements, the ones affecting timbre, are incredibly subtle and fast. They happen right around that moment the escapement occurs. We're talking about tiny, fleeting changes in acceleration, not just the overall speed. If your measurement is too slow, you just blur it all together, it gets averaged out, lost in the noise.
Ah, okay. So the high speed was needed to catch those tiny fluctuations right at the critical moment.
Precisely. This hacky system, non-contact and super fast, was the only way to capture what was really happening with the key movement for all 88 keys.
All right, so they've got the ultimate measuring tool. How did they set up the experiment to actually prove the timbre
It
difference?
was really well designed in two main parts. First, what they call the motor task. They brought in 20 top-tier, internationally known pianists, real virtuosos, and they asked them to play simple sequences, but with specific intentions for the sound quality, like play this passage aiming for a bright sound, then play it aiming for a dark sound, or light versus heavy.
Capturing the movements associated with those artistic goals makes sense.
Exactly. Then came the second part, the crucial perceptual test.
This is where they test if listeners can actually hear the difference.
Right. They got 40 participants. Importantly, it was a mix. Some were trained pianists. Others had basically no formal music background. These people listened to the recordings made during the motor task.
But wait, how did they deal with the old problem, making sure people weren't just hearing slight volume or timing differences?
That's the really clever part of the analysis. They used sophisticated signal processing on the recordings. They mathematically normalized the performances so that the average loudness, the intensity, and the timing variations between notes were virtually identical across the different intended timbres.
So they stripped away the volume and tempo cues, leaving just the tonal character itself.
As much as humanly possible, yes. They controlled for those confounding factors very, very carefully. They isolated the timbre.
Okay, moment of truth then, the listening tests. Did people actually perceive the bright tone when the pianist intended to play bright?
Yes, absolutely. This is the big reveal, the aha moment. Listeners consistently, reliably identified the timbre the pianist was aiming for.
Wow. So the pianist's intention, their artistic goal for the sound, was actually communicated through the instrument and picked up by the listener.
Precisely. And it wasn't just the trained musicians who heard it.
Really? Even the non-musicians?
Yes. Now, the trained pianists were, as you might expect, a bit more sensitive to the differences. They picked up on it more strongly. But even the participants with no musical training could perceive the intended timbral differences significantly better than chance.
That's huge. It proves that this expressive touch isn't some kind of, I don't know, collective illusion or just poetic language. It's real. It's measurable.
It's absolutely real. It shows that this refined motor control, right down to the fingertip level, is the mechanism for conveying that expressive, creative intent.
Okay, so we know the difference is audible. Now, the million-dollar question. If it's not just volume or tempo, what are the specific physical movements causing that change in sound? This is where the hacky data comes in, right?
This is exactly where it gets super interesting. They took all that high-resolution movement data and fed it into some heavy-duty statistical analysis, specifically something called a linear mix effects model.
Okay, sounds complicated. What does that let them do?
It's basically a smart way to untangle lots of different variables happening at once. It lets them figure out of all the tiny ways a key can move, which specific aspects correlate most strongly with the perceived timbre differences the listeners reported.
So, finding the signal in the noise, isolating the key ingredients.
You got it. And they found three main movement features that really stood out as being crucial for timbre.
All right, let's hear them. What's the first one?
The first, and maybe the most critical, is the acceleration when key escapement is reached. They give it a shorthand. Acceleration.
Acceleration, not escapement. So not just the final speed, but how quickly the key is gaining speed right at that moment it lets go of the hammer.
Exactly. Think about it. If the key suddenly speeds up, like a final little push right before the hammer flies free, it imparts a sharper initial impact on the hammer.
Okay, and what does that do to the sound?
That sharper impact makes the hammer hit the strings in a way that excites more of the high-frequency harmonics, the overtones. Our ears perceive that as a brighter, maybe more percussive or brilliant tone.
And if the acceleration is smoother, less of a final kick.
Then the impact is gentler, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
It emphasizes the fundamental frequency and lower harmonics more. We hear that as a darker, mellower, or rounder tone.
Fascinating. So it's all in that tiny final burst of acceleration. What's the second feature?
The second one is related to the very beginning of the sound. It's the initial velocity when the key is struck. which they linked to onset noise.
Onset noise, you mean like the clicking sound of the key itself?
Sort of, yeah. It's the subtle acoustic noise generated by the fingertip making contact with the key surface, and the key mechanism starting to move, even before the hammer hits the string and makes the main musical tone. How fast that initial contact happens affects the character of that little noise.
And that tiny noise actually colors our perception of the main note that follows.
Apparently so. It adds a kind of texture, influencing whether we perceive the overall note as having a sharper attack or a softer one. It's part of the whole sonic package.
Wow, okay, number 3.
The third key feature is the temporal overlap of consecutive keystrokes. Shorthand. Overlap.
Overlap. That sounds more about how notes connect together, like in a phrase.
It is, but it significantly affects the perceived timbre within that phrase. It's about how long a pianist keeps one key held down even slightly after the next key has already been pressed.
Ah, legato versus staccato, basically.
Exactly, but measured very precisely. If there's more overlap, notes blend smoothly together. This contributes to a perception of heaviness, richness, or sustain. Think legato. If there's very little overlap or even a tiny gap, the notes sound more detached, separate. Staccato. This contributes to a feeling of lightness, clarity, or articulation.
Okay, so like a statement for bright dark, onset noise for attack texture, and overlap for connected detached feel.
Those are the big three they identified.
And they didn't just find a correlation, did they? I remember reading they actually proved causation.
They did, and this is a crucial step. Finding correlation is one thing. Proving one causes the other is harder. They did a follow-up perceptual test. They took recordings and digitally manipulated only one feature at a time, specifically that escapement. They changed the acceleration profile slightly, making it brighter or darker according to their model, while keeping everything else, volume, timing, other movement features, effectively identical within a tiny margin of error.
And what happened?
Listeners perceived the difference in timbre, just based on that one isolated change in acceleration.
Wow, that nails it. That's the first direct empirical evidence that manipulating these specific tiny fingertip movements causes a change in perceived sound color, independent of volume.
It's landmark stuff. It closes that century-old debate.
Absolutely revolutionary. Okay, so now that we know this and we can measure it, what are the implications? This feels like it goes way beyond just settling an old argument in music.
Oh, definitely. The most immediate impact, of course, is in music education and for performers themselves. Think about teaching. For years, it was based on metaphor, play this heavier, make it sparkle. Now you can potentially give much more concrete, objective feedback.
Like, your statement needs to increase by about 15% for that brighter sound you're after.
Exactly. It provides a scientific basis for technique. It quantifies skills that were always considered purely intuitive or, well, tacit. This opens the door for evidence-based music pedagogy.
And maybe even technology to help learners.
For sure. You can imagine practice tools or software that give real-time feedback on these specific movement features, like a recommendation system. To achieve the darker tone demonstrated here, try focusing on a smoother acceleration profile through the escapement. It could help students learn faster and maybe avoid ingraining bad habits.
So it could make learning expressive playing more efficient, maybe more accessible?
That's the hope. The researchers even coined a term for this new approach, dynaformics. The idea is a new science of music performance grounded in understanding these dynamics.
Dynaformics. I like it. But let's zoom out even further. This isn't just about music, is it? This feels like a window into human skill learning in general.
Absolutely. What this study really illuminates is the connection between highly refined, dexterous motor control and the generation of complex, higher-order perceptions. And that principle applies everywhere.
You mean in any field where expert skill involves subtle physical actions?
Exactly. Think about sports. A pitcher's release, a golfer's swinging tiny variations in movement create hugely different outcomes. Or surgery. Surgeons talk about the feel of the tissue, the right amount of pressure. That's tacit knowledge based on motor control and sensory feedback.
So if we can quantify the pianist's touch for clarity, maybe we can quantify the surgeon's touch for precision.
That's the potential ripple effect. If we can measure and understand the specific motor features underlying expert performance in one domain, maybe we can apply similar principles to analyze and teach expertise in others. Think about craftsmanship, cooking, painting, even things like human-machine interface design, anywhere subtle physical skill leads to a desired perceptual or functional outcome.
It's about translating that expert intuition, that magic touch, into something understandable, measurable, and maybe even transferable.
Precisely. It bridges the gap between the sensory experience and the motor actions that create it. It shows how deeply integrated our sensory and motor systems are when we develop high levels of skill.
So wrapping this up, the big takeaway seems to be that the artistry of musical touch, the control over timbre, isn't just some poetic metaphor anymore.
Not at all. It's a real, measurable physical skill rooted in incredibly precise, high-speed fingertip movements. The magic has been quantified.
The mystery, after 100 years, is essentially solved.
Oh.
Expressive touch is scientifically validated.
Yes. And the deeper insight is about the power of being able to measure these subtle aspects of human skill. For so long, artists, surgeons, craftspeople, athletes, they were limited by their ability to articulate how they did what they did.
Science is finally catching up to intuition.
It's providing the language and the tools. The aim isn't to replace artistry, but maybe to liberate artists and other experts by removing some of the physical or pedagogical constraints. Understanding how it works can unlock new ways to learn and create.
Which leaves a fascinating thought for you, the listener, to ponder. We now know technology can pinpoint the exact sub-millisecond finger movement for musical brightness or weight. So what other incredibly refined human skills are out there currently considered intuitive gifts? Think about the delicate touch of a watchmaker, the precise knife skills of a master chef, maybe even the subtle body language of a great negotiator. Could dynaformics, this science of performance, eventually help us define, measure, and perhaps even accelerate the learning of those skills too? The possibilities seem vast.